Captain Jack Riley stood at the edge of the Grand Hall, surveying the room with a calm yet focused gaze. The alien palace, built from sleek, metallic structures, glittered under the soft glow of artificial lights. There were over 100 dignitaries. Gathered here, alien leaders, military commanders, and representatives from various factions of the Keleth Empire. His mission was clear: to negotiate peace between humanity and the Keleth, who had been in conflict for decades. Jack was used to high-pressure situations, but even he felt the weight of this moment. This wasn't just another diplomatic mission. This was humanity's chance to prove its place in the galaxy. He adjusted his uniform, a dark blue suit adorned with the insignia of the United Earth Federation, and took a deep breath before stepping forward. The Keleth were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They were tall, graceful beings, with shimmering skin that changed colors depending on their mood. Their technology was far beyond Earth's, and their society had been in power for millennia. But, despite their advanced civilization, there was a deep sense of superiority among them, especially towards humans, who were considered primitive in comparison. The Keleth saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, and they didn't take kindly to being challenged. Jack's job wasn't just to negotiate. It was to convince them that humans deserved a place at the table. As Jack made his way to the center of the room, his eyes locked with the Keleth princess, Lirith. She was standing near the head of the table, surrounded by her closest advisors. At 19, she was the youngest heir in her family's history, but her beauty, intelligence, and fierce confidence made her seem far older than her years. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, and her sharp green eyes studied Jack with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Lirith's reputation preceded her. She was known for her sharp tongue and her even sharper intellect. Many had tried to outwit her, but few had succeeded. Some of the human diplomats who had met her before Jack had returned with bruised egos and damaged pride. But Jack wasn't like the others. The gathering began with formal introductions. Jack took his place at the table, across from Princess Lirith, who gave him a brief, calculating look before turning her attention to the other delegates. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken expectations. Jack had learned in his years of diplomacy that silence was often more dangerous than words. And in this room, it felt like every person was waiting for something to happen. It was then that Lirith spoke, her voice clear and commanding. "Humanity," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "How amusing. You have managed to survive your own chaos long enough to reach this point. Yet you still cling to the idea that you can match the Keleth in any meaningful way." Jack didn't flinch. He had prepared for this moment. He had studied the Keleth, their customs, their history, and their pride. He understood the politics of the galaxy, and he knew that the key to any successful negotiation was to stay calm and composed. No matter how much they tried to provoke him, "You're mistaken," Jack replied, his voice steady. "Humans may not be as old or as advanced as the Keleth, but that doesn't make us weak. We've survived against all odds, and we've learned from our mistakes. That's what sets us apart." Lirith raised an eyebrow, her expression one of mild amusement. "Learn from your mistakes," she echoed, as if the idea were absurd. "Your species is little more than a footnote in the history of the galaxy. You've barely begun to understand the true power of the cosmos." The room fell silent, the other delegates watching intently. Jack could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond to the princess's words. This was the moment when many diplomats before him had stumbled. The Keleth were masters of manipulation, and they knew how to break their opponents down, piece by piece. But Jack didn't take the bait. Instead, he smiled politely. "Maybe we're just getting started," he said simply. Lirith's eyes narrowed. There was a flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe irritation in her gaze, but she quickly masked it with a cold smile. "Let's see how long your bravado lasts, human." She gestured to one of her aides, who stepped forward with a datapad. The aide handed the device to Jack, who glanced down at it. It was a list of proposed terms for the peace treaty. As he scanned the document, he noticed something odd. The terms were harsh, far harsher than anything he had expected. It was clear that Lirith had no intention of making this easy. The Keleth were offering peace, but on their terms alone. Jack's eyes lifted to meet the princess's gaze once again. "This isn't peace," he said. His voice tinged with disappointment. "This is a demand for submission." Lirith's smile widened. "Isn't that what you came here for? To bow before the might of the Keleth?" There was a pause. Jack's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, it felt as if the entire galaxy was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, without a word, Jack stood up from his seat and turned toward the door. The room erupted in murmurs of surprise and confusion. Lirith's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever walked away from a diplomatic engagement like this, especially not in the face of such an obvious provocation. Her hand clenched around the edge of the table as she stood up, but she didn't move. Jack didn't care about the reactions. He didn't care about what the other delegates thought. He had come here to protect humanity's dignity, not to grovel. And so, he walked out of the grand hall without another word. Outside, in the quiet corridor, Jack took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on him. He knew this was only the beginning, but something told him that Lirith would not forget this. In fact, it might just be the spark that would light a fire between them inside the hall. Lirith stared at the door for a long time, her mind racing. She had never seen such defiance before, not from any species, let alone from humans. It intrigued her, and for the first time, she wondered if perhaps she had underestimated them. But one thing was clear, this wasn't the last time they would meet. The days following Jack's abrupt departure from the diplomatic summit were filled with whispers and rumors. The Keleth diplomats were buzzing with confusion. It was unheard of for a human, or anyone for that matter, to walk away from the great Princess Lirith without so much as a second glance. Many Keleth saw Jack's action as weakness, but Princess Lirith was different. Her curiosity about the human diplomat only grew. At first, she couldn't quite place her feelings. Anger? No, it was something more. Was it respect? Maybe. Or was it frustration that someone had dared to defy her in such a way? She couldn't deny the sharpness of her reaction. She wasn't used to not getting her way, especially not when it came to matters of diplomacy. And yet, Jack's cool composure, his refusal to engage, had been the most disarming thing she had ever encountered. The next morning, an invitation arrived for Jack, a simple message delivered by one of Lirith's aides, asking him to meet the princess in her private chamber. The words were formal, but there was a tension in the air. This wasn't just another diplomatic exchange. This was personal. Jack read the note, then set it down on his desk. He hadn't expected to hear from Lirith so soon, but he wasn't surprised. The Keleth were known for their pride, and Lirith's pride had just been wounded. She wanted to prove that her people were not to be dismissed, that they were above any human. But Jack knew something she didn't. Human strength was not in their size or their technology. It was in their resilience. Taking a deep breath, Jack decided to go. He had nothing to lose, and this was, after all, his mission. The fate of the peace talks rested on his shoulders. If he backed down now, the Keleth would only see weakness. He had to remain steadfast, no matter what. When Jack arrived at the princess's private chambers, he was surprised to see a much smaller, more intimate space than he expected. The room was lined with exotic plants from all over the galaxy, their leaves shimmering in the soft light. At the center of the room, Princess Lirith stood, her posture as regal as ever, though her expression was more contemplative than before. She didn't look angry, but there was a fire in her eyes. "Captain Riley," she said, her voice steady but laced with something Jack couldn't quite place. "I've been thinking about our last meeting." Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "I can imagine. You think me foolish," Lirith continued, stepping closer to him. "You think I don't understand the value of peace. But the truth is, I know exactly what you are trying to do. And what would that be?" Jack asked, his tone calm. "You want me to respect you," she said, her voice growing sharper. "To bow before your human ways. You believe that because your species has managed to survive its own wars and chaos, you are somehow superior. But you are not. We are the Keleth. We are the rulers of this galaxy, and we do not bend." Jack didn't react right away. He wasn't about to get caught up in her challenge, but it was clear to him that this conversation was heading in a direction he hadn't expected. The princess wasn't just angry anymore. She was testing him, pushing him to respond, to show her the strength that he claimed humanity had. "I'm not asking you to bow," Jack said quietly, "but I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for humanity's place at the table. Not because we think we're better, but because we've learned something that you might have forgotten. That's what makes us different." Lilith stared at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You speak of learning. Then let us test your learning, Captain Riley. A challenge, if you will." Jack raised an eyebrow. "A challenge?" The princess smiled a sly, almost predatory grin. "Yes, I want to see if you are truly worthy of the respect you ask for. You've shown me you can walk away from diplomacy, but now I want to see if you can match the Keleth in skill and intellect. I want you to compete with me." Jack's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let it show. He knew this was coming. The Keleth would never simply hand over their respect, but he wasn't backing down. "Not now." "All right," he said, standing up straighter. "What sort of challenge?" Lilith's eyes sparkled with amusement, but there was something deeper. There's something more serious. "We will begin with a series of tests. A war game of tactics. A test of strategy and logic. You will have to prove that your mind can match ours. If you succeed, I will consider the possibility that humanity deserves more than just the scraps of the galaxy. But if you fail, I will consider your request for peace." Null and void. Jack couldn't help but smirk. "Is that all? Sounds like you're afraid of losing." The princess's smile didn't waver. "I never lose." The next day, Jack found himself in a grand arena. It wasn't a traditional arena with weapons or combat, no. The Keleth were too advanced for that. This was a holographic war game, a simulation of the galaxy's most strategic battlefields. Jack stood before a giant screen, on which the holographic maps of star systems flickered. Princess Lilith stood beside him, her arms folded as she observed the scene with a cold, calculating gaze. "You may choose your side," Lilith said, her tone like ice. "You will command a fleet of ships. I will command the opposing fleet. The objective is simple: destroy your opponent's flagship." Jack nodded, setting his gaze on the holographic map. This was a challenge of tactics, not just brute force. He could win this. He had fought many battles in his life, though none quite like this. He knew he had the skill to outthink his opponent. What he didn't know was just how far the princess was willing to go to prove her point. The game began, and the battlefield erupted into action. Jack moved quickly, using stealthy maneuvers and calculated risks to set up ambushes and traps for the Keleth fleet. Lilith countered every move with precision, her fleet shifting with perfect coordination. The tension in the air was palpable as the two of them clashed on the digital battlefield for hours. They played. Jack's fleet was getting closer to victory, but Lilith's defenses were stronger than he anticipated. He couldn't help but admire her skill. She was a brilliant tactician, but he wasn't going to give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jack made his move. He lured Lilith into a trap using a feigned retreat to draw her flagship into a vulnerable position. In one swift strike, he destroyed her flagship, securing his victory. Lilith stood still for a moment, her eyes locked on the screen. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. You won," Lilith said, her voice quieter than usual. "I admit, I underestimated you, Captain." Jack's expression remained calm, but inside, he felt a surge of triumph. It wasn't about underestimating. It was about understanding that there's more to strength than just firepower. The princess turned to him, a hint of something like respect in her gaze. "Perhaps there's more to humanity than I thought." The days following Jack's victory in the tactical war game passed quickly, but the tension between him and Princess Lilith didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Lilith was a proud being, and despite her grudging respect for Jack's abilities, she was not the type to easily accept defeat. Jack had proven himself worthy, but that wasn't enough to earn her full trust, not yet. Jack knew this, but he also understood that their growing rivalry could serve a purpose. The Keleth were not a peaceful species, and despite the games and tests, the galaxy's political situation was still precarious. The Keleth held vast influence, and their decision to form an alliance with humanity could change the course of history. But that wasn't going to happen with just a handshake and a smile. It would take something more. Jack had to find a way to push past their differences and build something more substantial. That meant working with Lirith, not against her. One evening, as the two sat across from each other in the palace's grand dining hall, a message came through for Jack. It was from the United Earth Federation, marked with the highest level of urgency. He opened it, quickly scanning the words on the screen. His face grew grim as he finished reading the message. The Keleth warlord, Korok, had broken away from the Empire and was amassing a fleet. Preparing to launch an attack on a human colony, Jack immediately stood up, his mind already racing through possible strategies. Korok had always been a troublemaker, but the fact that he was going rogue was a serious problem. If the warlord succeeded, it could trigger a full-scale war between the Keleth and humanity. Lirith watched Jack's reaction closely. "What's happened?" she asked, her tone unusually soft. "Korok," Jack replied quickly. "He's gone rogue and is preparing to attack a human colony. We need to stop him before it's too late." Lirith's eyes narrowed. Korok was a dangerous figure in the Keleth Empire. He had always been a thorn in Lirith's side, a warlord with a thirst for power. If he succeeded in his attack on humanity, it could fracture the fragile peace between the two species. "So, what do you propose?" she asked. Jack paused, realizing that this was more than just a military threat. This was an opportunity to prove to Lirith that humans were not the weaklings. She thought they were, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed her help. "I can't do this without your fleet," he said. "We need to work together to stop him." Lirith looked at Jack for a long moment, considering his words. Her pride was still at the forefront of her mind, but she knew that the threat posed by Korok was real. If he wasn't stopped, it could spell disaster for both the Keleth and humanity. She had to make a choice, and it wasn't one she could make lightly. "I'll help you," she said finally. "But know this, my help does not mean we are allies. It means we are both fighting a common enemy." Jack nodded. "Understood. We fight together, and when it's over, we'll go our separate ways. But right now, we need to work fast." The two of them quickly gathered their forces. Jack contacted the United Earth Federation and ordered reinforcements, while Lirith summoned her fleet's commanders. They would have to move quickly, for Korok's forces were already on the move. Time was running out. As they prepared for the mission, Jack couldn't help but notice the change in Lirith's behavior. Her earlier arrogance had softened, replaced by a focused determination. It was clear that she had set aside her pride for now and was ready to face the challenge head-on. The battle took place in the cold expanse of space, just beyond the edge of the human colony's defense perimeter. Korok's fleet, a collection of heavily armed warships, was already on the attack, firing relentlessly at the colony's defense shields. The situation was dire. If they didn't intervene soon, the colony would fall. Lirith's fleet arrived first, her ships moving with deadly precision. Jack stood by her side on the command bridge of her flagship, watching the unfolding battle on the holographic displays. He had to admit, the Keleth were masters of space combat. Their ships were sleek, fast, and devastatingly efficient. But Jack knew that the key to winning this battle wasn't just firepower, it was strategy. "We need to disrupt Korok's fleet's formation," Jack said, studying the enemy's movements. "Their ships are ranged in a defensive grid, but there's a weak point on the left flank. If we can push through there, we can divide their forces and take them down one by one." Lirith glanced at him, surprised by the simplicity of the plan. She had expected something more complicated, something more in line with the Keleth way of thinking. But Jack's suggestion made sense. She gave the order, and her fleet immediately shifted into position for hours. The two fleets clashed in the dark void of space. The battle was fierce, with explosions lighting up the blackness as ships fired at one another. Jack's heart raced as the seconds ticked by. He had fought in many battles before, but this one felt different. This was a true test of his leadership, his ability to work with Lirith and her people. But what surprised him most was how well they worked together. The Keleth followed his lead without question, and Lirith was a quick learner, adjusting her tactics as the battle unfolded. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, they broke through Orcs' defenses. The warlords' fleet was in disarray, and their flagship was exposed. Jack's ship fired the final shot, disabling Orcs' flagship and bringing the battle to an end. On the bridge, the crew erupted into cheers. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had won. Lilith turned to him, her expression unreadable. "We did it," she said simply. Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, we did." Together. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Lilith spoke again, her voice softer than it had been before. "I didn't expect you to be this capable. You've proven yourself, Jack Riley." Jack looked at her, his smile fading slightly. "I'm just doing my job. But you did your part, too. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours." Lilith's eyes softened for the briefest of moments. There was something almost human in her gaze, a flicker of admiration, perhaps even friendship. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared, replaced once again by the cold, calculating princess the galaxy knew so well. "We've completed our mission," she said, her voice firm. "Now, the question remains, what happens next?" Jack considered her words carefully. "We've shown that humanity and the Keleth can work together, but we still have a long way to go before true peace is possible." Lilith's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps. But for now, we've taken the first step." Jack nodded. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. And sometimes, that was all it took. The aftermath of the battle against Orcs' fleet was nothing short of triumphant. The United Earth Federation praised Jack's strategic genius, and the Keleth Empire recognized Lilith's tactical prowess. However, despite the victory, something felt unfinished. Though the immediate threat had been eliminated, the peace talks between humanity and the Keleth were still far from complete. Jack knew that. The real work was yet to begin. Lilith's pride had been bruised in their earlier encounters, but there was no denying that she had proven herself capable in combat. Jack, however, sensed that their alliance was fragile. It was one thing to fight together against a common enemy, but it was another thing entirely to trust one another when it came to forging a lasting peace. The Keleth were proud, and humanity, despite its resilience, still had a lot to prove. After the battle, Jack and Lilith met again in a private meeting room on her flagship. The room was silent, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. Lilith sat across from Jack, her expression unreadable as she examined him, as if searching for something deeper, something beyond the diplomat who had once walked away from her insults. "You did well today," Lilith said, her voice softer than usual. "You have earned my respect, Captain Riley. I admit, I underestimated you." Jack leaned back in his chair, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I appreciate that, Princess. But we both know respect alone won't fix things between our species." Lilith's eyes flickered, and Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind. "True," she said after a pause. "The battle was just one step. But now that Cork is no longer a threat, we must return to our original purpose, the peace talks." "I'm aware," Jack replied. "But peace is never just about ending wars. It's about understanding, compromise, and trust. It's about seeing each other as equals, not just allies in a battle." Lilith regarded him quietly for a moment before speaking again. "You think humanity can learn that?" Jack nodded, his gaze steady. "We've had our struggles. We're far from perfect, but we've learned from our mistakes. It's not always easy, but we're willing to try." Lilith didn't say anything for a long while. Then, in an unexpected move, she stood up and walked over to the window. The view from the bridge of her flagship was breathtaking, vast stretches of stars and planets, with the soft glow of distant suns illuminating the galaxy. She seemed to lose herself in the view for a moment, her thoughts drifting far away. "Tell me," she said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "what do you think is the true strength of your species?" Jack was taken aback by the question. It wasn't one he had expected, and he had to think carefully before answering. "Strength isn't just about power or technology," he said slowly. "It's about our ability to keep going, even when everything seems impossible. We've been through wars, disasters, and countless challenges, Yet we keep moving forward. We make mistakes, but we learn. That's our strength. Lilith turned to face him, her sharp green eyes studying him intently. And do you think that will be enough to convince my people? The Keleth don't value weakness, and they will see humanity's flaws before they see your resilience. Jack didn't flinch. Maybe, but it's not about convincing everyone all at once. It's about proving that we can stand on our own 2 feet. If we can't show that we're not afraid to face our flaws, to work together, we can earn their respect. Lilith regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I can see why the humans survived, despite your history. There's strength in your ability to adapt, to rise above. Jack smiled slightly. That's what we do best. Lilith's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Then let's see if that strength holds up in the face of a true test. The following day, Lilith presented Jack with a challenge. It wasn't a battle of tactics or strength, but a test of humanity itself. She had gathered a select group of Keleth scholars and diplomats to participate in a high-level negotiation. The goal was to test humanity's ability to navigate complex diplomatic situations, to see if they could handle the subtle nuances of galactic politics. This wasn't a game. It was a serious test of Jack's ability to handle the delicate balance between pride and diplomacy, between strength and humility. The stakes were high, and if Jack failed, it could have lasting consequences for humanity's place in the galaxy. The room where the negotiation took place was imposing. It was a circular chamber with high, vaulted ceilings. The walls lined with intricate alien symbols that shifted as if alive. A holographic display hovered in the center, showing a map of disputed star systems and trade routes. Round the table sat the Keleth diplomats, their expressions unreadable, their eyes fixed on Jack. Lilith stood at the head of the table, her posture commanding respect. She didn't look at Jack as she spoke. Her attention was fixed firmly on the task at hand. We are here to discuss the fate of the Tariff system, she began. The humans claim the system as part of their territory, but it lies near Keleth-controlled space. The question is whether we will share it as a joint venture or if we will claim it for ourselves. Jack took a deep breath and stepped forward. He had expected this. The Keleth had always been territorial, and the Tariff system was a valuable resource. But Jack knew that this was more than just a territorial dispute. It was a test of how far humanity was willing to go to secure peace. Princess Lilith, he said, his voice steady but firm, humanity does not seek to take what belongs to others. But we do want to ensure that the Tariff system remains open for all to benefit from. This isn't about ownership, it's about collaboration. Lilith's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. The Keleth diplomats were watching Jack carefully, waiting for him to make his next move. You're asking for trust, one of the Keleth diplomats said, his voice cold. But your species has a history of breaking promises. How do you expect us to believe that you will honor any agreements you make? Jack didn't flinch. This was the moment of truth. Trust is earned, he replied. I can't change the past, but I can promise that we will work to make this partnership one of mutual respect. I'm not asking you to trust humanity blindly. I'm asking you to give us a chance to prove ourselves. Lilith watched him closely. The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. The Keleth diplomats exchanged glances, their eyes shifting between Jack and Lilith. Finally, one of them spoke. I'll allow the humans to have a seat at the table, the diplomat said, his voice grudging but respectful. But the terms will be strict. We will not tolerate failure. Jack nodded, his heart pounding. He had won the first step, but the war for peace was far from over. He turned to Lilith, who gave him a small, approving nod. You've passed the test, Captain Riley, she said quietly. But this is only the beginning. As Jack left the chamber, his mind was racing. They had made progress, but there was still a long road ahead. The Keleth were not easy to win over, and every step they took toward peace would be met with new challenges. But one thing was certain. Humanity had shown its strength, and with Lilith by his side, perhaps they had a chance to build something truly lasting, a partnership between their worlds that could withstand the test of time. The peace talks were far from over, but the seeds of cooperation between humanity and the Keleth had finally been planted. After the negotiation in the tariff system, the path ahead seemed clearer, though still full of challenges. Jack had earned Lirith's respect, and with it, a fragile but promising alliance. The negotiations continued, with Jack playing a central role in the discussions. But for the first time since he'd stepped into the Keleth Empire, he felt like humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer in question. However, despite the progress, a new and unforeseen problem arose. A faction within the Keleth Empire, who believed that the peace talks would weaken their rule, began to rise in opposition. They were led by a powerful warlord named Draxer, an ambitious Keleth general who had long despised the idea of cooperation with humanity. Draxer believed that their people's future lay maintaining their dominance over the galaxy. If the Keleth were to share their power, he feared it would lead to their downfall. Draxer's forces were growing, quietly building in strength, and they were determined to end the peace talks and restore the Keleth to their previous state of superiority. But what they didn't understand was that Lirith, now a changed person, had no intention of returning to the old ways. Jack received a message one night, transmitted in secret. It was from Lirith. Her words were direct, tinged with urgency. "Meet me at the Royal Citadel. There is no time to waste. Draxer is planning something that could destroy everything we've built." The Royal Citadel was a grand, ancient structure in the heart of the Keleth capital. Once the seat of absolute power, it now served as the center for the ongoing peace talks. Lirith waited in a private chamber at the top of the citadel. When Jack arrived, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need your help, Jack," she said, her tone sharp, but with an underlying sense of urgency. "Draxer has rallied a significant portion of the military behind him. He plans to strike against humanity in the next few days, using his forces to sabotage the peace efforts once and for all. He thinks that if he can destroy your Federation's primary outpost near the Keleth border, it will make humanity retreat from the negotiation table." Jack stood still, processing the information. A war between the Keleth and humanity was not something they could afford. "What's the plan, Princess?" Lirith's eyes met his. "I'm going to confront Draxer directly, but I can't do it alone. If we are to stop him, we'll need to act quickly, and we'll need more than just our forces. We need to show both the Keleth and humanity that peace is the only path forward." Jack understood. This wasn't just about military might, it was about sending a message. If Draxer succeeded, it would undo everything they had worked toward. The future of the Alliance rested on this moment. As they prepared, Jack and Lirith discussed their strategy. Their plan was simple, but risky. They would use their combined forces to intercept Draxer's fleet before it reached the human outpost. They knew that they couldn't afford to wait. The Keleth forces loyal to Draxer were already on the move, and time was running out. Lirith's fleet was formidable, but Draxer's forces were still powerful. It would be a direct confrontation. Jack would lead the human forces, while Lirith would command her own Keleth fleet. They couldn't let Draxer divide them. They had to fight together, or risk losing everything. The battle took place just outside the human colony's defense zone, where the vast expanse of space stretched endlessly in all directions. Lirith's flagship, a sleek and powerful vessel, led the charge, with Jack's fleet following closely behind. They didn't have much time to prepare, and every second was critical. Jack stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the view in front of him. The stars were scattered like diamonds across a dark sky, and in the distance, Draxer's fleet loomed, massive ships that cut through space with cold precision. Jack's heart beat faster, but his mind was focused. This wasn't just about tactics or firepower. This was about the future of both their species. Failure was not an option. "Stay sharp, everyone," Jack ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We have one chance to stop Draxer. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it through." Lirith's voice crackled through the comms. "I won't let Draxer destroy what we've worked for, Captain. If we fail, all will be lost." Jack nodded, his hands clenched around the controls. "We won't fail. Together, we'll stop him." The battle was swift but brutal. Draxer's fleet launched an initial barrage of missiles, hoping to cripple their forces before they could react. The ships around Jack and Lirith shook from the impact of the blasts, but they fought back with equal force. Explosions filled the vast expanse of space, lighting up the darkness with flashes of color. Lilith's fleet cut through Draxter's ships like a knife through butter, but Jack's fleet was under heavy fire. They had the numbers, but Draxter's forces were relentless. The outcome was still uncertain, and the stakes were higher than ever. On the bridge of Lilith's flagship, Jack could see the intensity in her eyes. She was no longer the young princess who had mocked humanity. She was a warrior, determined to protect both her people and the fragile alliance between their species. Captain, we need to disable Draxter's flagship. Lilith's voice came over the comms. I'll take the left flank. You take the right. If we can destroy his command ship, we'll break his forces. Jack acknowledged the order. He knew what it meant. This was the final move, the one that could end the conflict once and for all. As the two fleets continued their battle, Jack and Lilith made their move. Lilith's fleet swept to the left, drawing Draxter's forces into a trap. At the same time, Jack's ships moved to the right, creating a diversion that allowed Lilith's flagship to close in on Draxter's command ship. The two leaders coordinated their attacks with precision, using their combined knowledge and experience to outmaneuver the enemy. Jack's heart raced as he watched the holographic display. They were getting close. The enemy ships were growing fewer, their formation breaking apart as Lilith's fleet and Jack's forces pushed forward. The moment of truth was upon them. With one final strike, Jack ordered his fleet to launch their full assault on Draxter's flagship. The missiles tore through the space around it, hitting their target with devastating accuracy. The flagship's shields flared brightly, but they couldn't withstand the barrage. The ship exploded in a burst of light and energy, sending shock waves through the battlefield. For a long moment, there was silence. The battle had ended, but the consequences were still uncertain. Jack stood at the command station, staring at the wreckage of Draxter's fleet. They had won, but the victory was bittersweet. The peace talks had been threatened, and the alliance between humanity and the Keleth had been tested to its limits. Lilith's voice came over the comms once again, softer this time. We've done it, Jack. Draxter is gone, and his forces are scattering. The path to peace is open once more. Jack let out a slow breath. We've won the battle, but the war for peace is never truly over. Lilith was quiet for a moment before responding. Perhaps, but I believe we've taken the first true step towards something better. As the remnants of the battle cleared, Jack and Lilith stood together, their fleets now allies in the true sense of the word. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but in this moment, humanity and the Keleth had forged something stronger than either could have imagined: trust.